Welcome everyone, we're so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and joining us for another episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast with your hosts Steve Hodgson and Dr. Eric L. Davis. We ask that you please note that the information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. It is essential to consult with a qualified healthcare professional for any medical concerns, diagnosis, or treatment. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, and any actions taken based on the information presented are at your own risk. We are so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and join us for a brand new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Let's watch what this evening's podcast is all about. The title of this evening's episode is The Hidden Mental Health Dangers of Cannabis. They told us it was natural. They told us it was safe. They told us you only have to worry about getting the munchies. They told us not to worry, it's just weed. It's a natural plant. And for some it is. For some it offers peace. For some MS patients and cancer patients it causes some pain relief. But for others, it's a door to something darker. Much darker. Panic attacks, paranoia, depression, psychosis. I feel disconnected, I can't stop crying, my thoughts aren't mine, I thought I was safe. The truth? Cannabis can hurt the very thing it promises to heal, your mind. A study showed smoking or ingesting THC edibles impair vascular function, reducing endothelial performance by 42%, smokers, and 56% edible users, compared to non-users. A large meta-analysis found cannabis users have a 29% higher risk of acute coronary syndrome and a 20% higher risk of stroke, plus a doubling of risk for cardiovascular-related death. Cannabis users have 29% increased risk of heart attack, 20% increased risk of stroke, 2 times the risk of death from cardiovascular causes. THC reduces blood vessel function by up to 56%. Younger users are now showing early signs of vascular disease. Senior cannabis use rose from less than 1% in 2005 to 7% in 2023. Older users had up to 72% higher risk of dementia. Within 5 years, Gen Z is increasing cannabis consumption and may be unaware of hidden cardiovascular damage. Emergency room visits increased 2,700% in Ontario. There is emerging science that says prenatal THC exposure may cause genetic changes in fetal development. Cannabis-exposed babies may face long-term risks for ADHD, mood disorders, learning disabilities. THC can pass through breast milk for up to 6 days. Sadly, many pregnant people falsely believe cannabis is safer than alcohol. Cannabis use during pregnancy is not currently screened in many clinics. In tonight's episode, we will face the facts and speak the truth because silence is no longer an option. Here are your hosts.
Well, howdy, and welcome back to the Your Life Matters Show podcast. I'm your host, Steve Hodgson, and as always, I'm here with my co-host, the doctor without a couch, a licensed clinical psychotherapist, Dr. Eric L. Davis. Dr. Davis, thank you, for being here again. And
Absolutely.
I think we really have an interesting show tonight, to say the least.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, so many people have partaken in smoking over the years, okay? Our hosts included, for transparency. And, I live in Florida where it's actually legal, where the doctors know, which we will talk about later. But, I guess because of the lung condition, I don't even really think about it anymore. But the reasons I don't think about it is not because it would affect my lungs, because I could take a gummy or something like that and not even have to worry about it. But it's all the other stuff we're going to talk about today that makes it very scary for anyone, seniors. And trust me, I have friends of mine that smoke every day. Some of them call it wake and bake, believe it or not, where they wake up and, they smoke a joint before they start the day. It's got some really bad effects. And now we're not going to, well, I'll get into that. Because if you ever thought of one of our episodes, we're going to go up and smoke, I guess this is going to be the one, okay? I mean, I tried to get Sister Mary Elephant or Cheech and Chong to come on, but I couldn't get them for this episode. So,
Mr. Leaf also turned us down.
That's right. So grab your chips and your beer, and join us today as we delve into a subject that's also wrapped up in smoke, literally and figuratively. Okay, tonight's episode we'll discuss cannabis and your mind. I get it. It's all natural. It's legal in many places. And for millions of people, it's a daily part of life, as I said. In all honesty, there was a time many, many moons ago, I participated and, include myself with the millions of people, including Dr. Davis here. We were talking a
Yep.
few minutes ago. Now, remember, I grew up in Greenwich Village in New York City in the 70s to the 90s. You couldn't walk through Washington Square Park without at least getting contact high. I mean, everybody was sitting around on benches smoking. Hollywood's glamorized it. Cheech and Chong's made a fortune off of it. Okay, I guess Snoop Dogg and Willie Nelson also enjoy it very well for their music too. But we
Yep.
need to get real. Behind that haze of normalization, a quieter story is emerging, one that raises serious questions about how cannabis could be affecting our minds. From anxiety, paranoia to psychosis, sudden risks of suicide, addiction, new studies are showing us that cannabis is not only as harmless as it's made out to be. And yet most people have no idea. In fact, I'm sure many don't even waste their time watching the show this evening. I'm willing to bet that. It's like, man, there's nothing wrong with smoking weed, Well, we don't work for anybody. We work for ourselves. Okay.
Yep.
And we're just pointing out some of the dangers. Today we're going to go deep. Okay. We're going to talk about the science and the very human impact of cannabis on mental health. We're not here to shame anyone, but we're here to speak truth, especially to those who may be struggling and don't even know why. Now, Dr. Davis, I'm sure in your practice, you've seen firsthand what cannabis can do to someone's mind and body. I've heard people say, but if cannabis is natural, doesn't it automatically mean it's safe for us, including our minds? Or how is it possible to be addicted to something that doesn't even feel addicted? That gateway drug, as they called it for all those years. So from your clinical experience, how does regular cannabis use affect the person's mental health over time?
A big thing that I see often has to do with emotional regulation, and also what we call amotivational syndrome. So amotivational syndrome is when I always think back, there was a commercial when I was a kid, and it was a little kid and he was talking about I think his older brother, and he's like, and Billy always hung out in the basement at mom's house and smoked pot, and really that's all Billy ever did. And basically saying like, well, Billy never left the basement, he never did anything. And so we do see a lot of amotivational syndrome happen, where people just lose basically the drive to do much. But the big thing I look at in my work with clients is, what is the purpose of using the cannabis? Is it something that, a doctor is overseeing, or a doctor is recommending for a specific thing, in a state where it's legal? Or is it to simply, medicate myself and play physician and, diagnose myself and prescribe myself? It really, from a harm reduction standpoint, there are definitely worse things out there, but that doesn't mean that this isn't bad.
But you hear a lot of people say it's not any worse than alcohol. I can drink alcohol, that's legal, so why can't I smoke a joint? And we will get into a little later. It does have some medical benefits for people that have muscular sclerosis and a few other things. Montel Williams comes to mind right away for that. He says he's been able to deal with the pain from that. So yeah, but I think you're right. A lot of people are self-medicating, just to not have to deal with today.
I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but marijuana, like other substances, it presents the user with this basically impression that, hey, I'm feeling better, things are getting better. The reality is it's basically just like an emotional cloak of invisibility, where we're just hiding from whatever's going on. So it doesn't, just like drinking doesn't address a single problem unless a person's thirsty,
Right.
But any drink can address that problem. So it really matters on why. Is marijuana just a coping mechanism? If that's the case, then that's probably not good because you're not learning to cope with things realistically.
Well, what about, do you think the cannabis is really being underestimated as contributing to anxiety and depression?
Oh, absolutely. I think especially with anxiety and depression, because um, when a person gets high, it can mask those feelings, but it does nothing to solve the actual issue, where if you think about what I'm saying is any behavioral health problem is typically a twofold solution. And so there's going to be, medication for a lot of, issues. And marijuana could be used as a medication for certain things, but then there's also the coping skills, where if nothing changes, if I'm not changing how I deal with my emotions, how I process things, if I, et cetera, nothing would change. There would be no change to a problem.
So I know a lot of people, and probably myself was included in that, after working a long day, at work, traveling and stuff, I'd come home, and just smoke a joint and relax the rest of the night, chill out. But, I was always one of those people, I hated to drive afterwards. And it's the same thing with, like, if you're going to have a drink, that's one thing, but don't get behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. People really thought for years it's no different than drinking alcohol. And I'm sorry, it's really sad, but I think depending on how drunk the person is, I think I'd rather get, someone that's had 2 drinks and get in the car with them than someone that smoked, a nice fat joint first, because they're not paying attention anymore. As much as they think they are, their head's floating off somewhere else, and that's going to be a problem. So, what do people misunderstand most about cannabis and that emotional regulation side? Because there's a big part of, like you said, why you're even smoking the joint in the first place.
Yeah. So it really it affects the emotional regulation or ability to regulate our emotions. Where if you think about it, you and I were talking about this kind of before we started today, but we're both musicians, and back when I was, getting high, I was scared to death that I wouldn't enjoy the music as much, playing drums to the music or performing, playing music. And I think that a lot of times people will see a substance as a tool, that is going to enhance things, when in actuality it doesn't. I mean, we may feel like it does, but it doesn't. And that was the thing. My point with that was, when I stopped using, when I played music sober, it was like, wow, I had no idea that I was plugged in more than ever before, or more than I had been in years. And so I think that's, if you think about it, if I have an issue and every time something happens, I just smoke and forget about it, am I solving whatever's going on?
Right.
And the answer is
You're
no.
not dealing with the issues.
Yeah, not dealing with the issues at hand.
And as I said, so many people say, "Oh, just smoke a joint and chill out." That's what you hear people
Yeah.
say. But most people that have smoked will tell you about the paranoia, because that paranoia does. I mean, I can tell you about you know, you think they can smell that over there? You think, or they think they notice on my eyes shot, your bloodshot? Okay, you think they can
Yeah.
notice you smell it maybe on my clothes? Okay, because I don't smell that paranoia sneaks in. Even people have panic attacks from it, and especially with edibles.
Yeah.
Why does that happen to us?
I think it's because of probably the dose, where um, the reality is you wouldn't really necessarily know what you're getting, and things affect people in different ways. So I think that um, but I know for me, I think back to, years ago, decades ago, when I was using it, and I think, man, well, the stuff was pretty powerful then. I can't even imagine what it's like decades later. So, I think a lot of times people, oh, this is, you just don't know what you're getting.
And the thing is now, with legal stuff, you especially things you go into a dispensary and buy, marijuana. You can imagine how pure and potent that stuff is. And even we see a lot of stuff in stores now that we were talking about the Delta 7,
Yeah,
Delta 8, and Delta
yeah.
9. And I mean, I tried that once. Never again, folks. Never again. Whoa. Okay. That was that really, really bad. Um, but again, that's almost synthetic type of
Yeah.
drugs too. So there are people that obviously have anxiety disorders, whether PTSD or, depression and stuff. How does cannabis actually hurt that? I mean, what does it do along with it? If you have that problem and then you start smoking, what is that going to do?
It's just, I mean, it would probably mask the anxiety for a little while, but over time, what it's going to do is, as the body's tolerance raises, et cetera, then people find themselves in a position where they basically will have to smoke to feel okay, or to feel normal. What happens with drugs is, with prolonged use, after a while, you can't even hardly feel normal whether you use it or not. So um, it isn't a coping mechanism. It isn't an effective problem solving tool.
So what about the cases where cannabis has triggered panic or anxiety symptoms that lingered even after someone stopped using?
Well, so the relaxing image of cannabis, it's only part of the story. THC affects brain chemistry, and when the dose is too high, especially with edibles, it can overwhelm the nervous system. So for some people, this leads to an overactive stress response, feeling paranoid, panic attacks. It'd be like hitting the gas instead of the brakes in a car.
I've
Just
done
making it work.
that.
Me too.
Yeah, I've done that. Now I just blame it that I'm getting old. Okay. I'm sorry, I got these big feet. Okay. So I want to go off a little bit and talk about teens and cannabis use. Now, for years, there's always been that one kid in school who sold the weed or at least could get it for you. Okay. Because
Yeah.
probably the parents did. And there's so many teens who attempt to function normally, as they say, throughout the day, smoking, vaping, or even taking edibles. Many have that wake and bake routine they go through. And we're talking about too, I don't know if some of our users are aware, but they actually sell cannabis and weed for vaping pens as well. So you might think that your child is or your teen is just vaping, but they may be smoking weed too. And it smells like weed. I've been around people that have done that. It smells like weed, but you may not notice it. If you're looking outside the window, you think, well, he went outside to smoke. Yeah, well, he went outside to smoke, literally. So, cannabis use during teen years carries significant medical risks, particularly impacting brain development and mental health. Regular use can lead to impaired cognitive function, increased risk of addiction, and potential development of mental health disorders like psychosis and depression. Furthermore, it can negatively affect academic performance, social interactions, and increase the risk of accidents and injuries. Now, understand that these risks continue into your mid 20s. And I always remember Dr. Phil would always pound that down. You don't realize, you think it's okay now, but your brain hasn't fully developed yet. Until you're in your mid 20s, your brain is still developing. So when you're at the age your brain is still not fully developed, you may think you know it all. Well, I think every teen thinks they know it all, but medically,
I mean, I did when I was a teenager.
well, so did I. Okay, but I also had a father who was a police officer, and he made sure to remind you he knew it all. So, Dr. Davis, how does cannabis affect that developing brain?
Well, so regular use can impair memory. So it impairs memory, learning, motivation. Um, if you think about it, if you're growing a plant and you start pouring a bunch of stuff other than water on it, I mean, it's definitely, as that plant is sprouting or whatever, it's going to affect, how it grows. And same thing happens with the brain.
See, what concern should we have when it comes to adolescents using cannabis, especially, and I guess I really want to focus on ones that already have a history of trauma in their family and their
I think
upbringing.
so teens with histories of trauma are especially vulnerable because they're already trying to manage emotional pain with limited coping skills. So um, like we were talking about, using is not truly a coping, it's not an effective coping skill. So that would be a big part of that.
I would think it's more of a deflecting skill.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
When you really think about it, you're deflecting having to deal with the issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, we talk
It's
about that.
emotional procrastination.
Exactly. But it makes you forget what's really going on around you, the serious stuff, because your brain can only function on going somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I guess that's that. What is that? Hyalutha, what is that stuff? That's ayahuasca or something like that.
Oh, ayahuasca,
Yeah,
ibogaine.
right. Well, there's stuff that they're doing now that it's illegal, but they do it like out in the jungle
Oh,
someplace. They have,
ayahuasca.
yeah. I mean, that's basically the same thing. It's stopping your brain from thinking everything that's going on right now and just opening up, going deep in your brain and just letting all these emotions out.
Yeah.
And I think even that's scary. We could actually do a show on that one day too. So, what long-term cognitive effects are we talking about for teens if they use cannabis?
So we see evidence of long-term impacts on attention, memory, executive functioning. Some of the changes are subtle, but they can definitely affect school performance, um, long-term goal achievement. So the earlier and more frequently somebody uses, the more pronounced the effects are going to be.
What about disorders like, and we're going to do an entire show on it next week, schizophrenia with teens and
Also,
young adults?
so the link between schizophrenia and cannabis is actually very real. So, particularly for people with a family history of psychosis or other risk factors, regular use, especially high potency THC, can increase the risk of developing psychotic symptoms or even triggering a full psychotic episode. The earlier use begins, the higher the risk.
Okay, can we describe, if someone's listening? I'm trying to think of people that what is psychosis? I think
So
that's a good
psychosis
idea.
So psychosis is basically a state that is outside of normal, really is a way of thinking that. So when you say someone is, oh my gosh, they're psychotic, what we're saying is something's off, something is not normal there. So basically think of the opposite of psychosis as being homeostasis, where everything is operating exactly as it should be. It's a well-oiled machine. Um, so if you think of an engine, hearing pistons ticking or hiccups in the motor running, those would be like the equivalent of psychosis in the brain.
And people see things, they hear things, depending on the extent of how stoned they are.
Yeah,
Um, we did show on paranormal, and I know myself from all those years, there were times we'd be at someone's house, and you could tell they were stoned before we even got there. And all of a
yeah,
sudden they're sitting there and yeah, man, like I've seen things float in the corner and you sit there thinking, well, maybe we should put the joint down a little bit, and
yeah.
sober up a little bit and then tell me if you still see it, because I mean that brings that psychosis. So how do we know that? I mean, are there warning signs besides the obvious one, like I just pointed out, that
Yeah.
cannabis is beginning to affect someone's sense of reality?
I mean, I think that if things start to fall apart, a lot of times people won't think that it's the substance use. Here's the hard part. In order to determine if it is substance use or not, you have to
Yeah,
quit
stop.
using the substance, and you have to stop for a long enough period that substance is out of the system. It's no longer affecting. Um, and that's difficult, especially when you're talking about so if someone's using chronically, if they're using every day, it's going to be extremely difficult to know for sure what's going on, because you can't. And I remember that was one of the first things, like even in undergrad, that we were learning what, as far as like diagnosis and so forth. They were like, don't ever diagnose someone who is actively using a controlled substance because, their controlled substances cause, the body to behave in ways. That's why they're controlled. And so, we really need to have a clear picture, and it just blurs that picture.
I look at so many times where I think of the Steve Wilkos show as an
Uh-huh.
example, okay? Where
God
someone comes
forbid.
on yeah, but they come on to do a lie detector test. And they're
Yeah.
told for like 2 or 3 weeks, no drugs, no weed, no nothing. And they show up to the show and they're tested before they're given the test
The
and
cup
they test
melts.
positive for it. Yeah. And
That's what I used to tell clients. They'd say, "Hey, I went and took my drug screen today." And I'd say, "Did the cup melt?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, all right, it's probably fine then.
right. But I mean, there are a lot of people that have a problem, even
Yeah.
with something as, you know, we talked about what people said, it's just weed, it's natural. I can't become addicted to it. I touched the line on a
Yeah.
previous page there. But
The
you
reality is
can become addicted to it.
there is an addictive component. A lot of the argument against that is that there's no like withdrawal, and so I'm going to compare apples and oranges for a second, but like heroin, heroin has a very obvious withdrawal.
Mhm.
It's And the thing is, um, especially heroin, especially there's restless legs, there can be diarrhea, the shakes, cold sweats. The person will be burning up, but they're shaking like they're free. I mean, there's just all sorts of things that happen. With cannabis, we don't see those same things in the same way. What we do see is typically chronic irritability, problems sleeping, um, you know, uh, changes in appetite and so forth. But the reality is it's just not as outwardly visible. But there are withdrawal symptoms from cannabis. I mean, there really are.
But even I know, myself included, there were times that even sleeping was a problem. You would
Yeah.
think I'm so stoned I'm going to just smoke enough and pass out and that's going to be it. But then
Mhm.
you wide awake after that, a couple
Yeah.
hours later, and we won't talk about the munchies and all of that stuff that
When in
we
the body, keep in mind too, our body system is one of routine.
hmm
It's funny because I think about my dogs. Aaron and I have two dogs, and I mean, routine is everything. It's like, wow, they don't even know how to tell time, and they know when I'm going to be getting home. They know when it's time to get like, if you think about that, the using cannabis, it changes that. You can see where it would change the circadian rhythms when you're sleeping, or so on and so forth. So
So I want to go into a serious subject for a couple of questions, and that's suicide, because there is a huge risk of suicide that cannabis smokers face. Um, there's a thing called cannabis use disorder, CUD. CUD is what they refer to it as, and it's associated with higher suicide risk. What's your view on how cannabis can influence suicidal thinking?
So cannabis, it can worsen emotional lows of someone already vulnerable. So if you have someone who is already dealing with, say, depression, the cannabis can just uh, make that worse,
It
honestly.
amplifies it.
Yeah, it can amplify it, That's the
Mhm.
thing too, like with alcohol, you know, people will drink to try and get over depression. However, alcohol in and of itself is a depressant, so um and the same thing with cannabis, where maybe it would mask things for a while, but ultimately, if I'm not treating a problem, that problem is going to get worse.
I would just think even with the paranoia
Oh
behind
yeah.
smoking cannabis and you're suicidal, that's only going to
Mhm.
grow into something much bigger because you're already not thinking straight. And now let's add, taking a gummy or, smoking.
Mhm.
Um,
What if you
what
think about the
make,
decision-making capacity also? If I'm extremely depressed, I'm extremely stoned, I mean, I might make poor decisions.
right. And, with every decision that you're going to make, we were talking about this with something else earlier, but with jobs and stuff, wait
Yeah.
to the next day.
Yeah.
Okay. When you're thinking clearer, if you say, you know what, I'm going to end my life. Okay. Just stop and say, okay, well, you know what, if I feel this way tomorrow morning, then, I'm not saying to get help in between, but I'm just saying put off whatever decisions, any kind of rash decisions you're going to make. Just put them off to the next day. And if
Yeah.
you're still feeling that way the next day, then do it. Because it might just be one of those moment things and it's too late, especially with suicide. One thing
Mhm.
you lose your job, okay, but taking your life is something else. Now we talked about the cannabis use disorder, CUB. What is different about CUD? What I mean, is it harder to identify than other substance use disorders, let's say?
Not necessarily. So it's in the DSM-5, which is a current iteration of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is like we always say the behavioral health Bible, so to speak. That's
Mhm.
our go-to. That is what determines how we diagnose, what's diagnosed, etc. So cannabis use disorder is really one of those diagnoses where we used to have abuse and dependency. Um, so there, it usually in the past it would have been cannabis abuse or cannabis dependency based on different diagnostic criteria. Now, what they've done in the DSM-5 is it's a spectrum, so like from one end to the other. Um, and so now it would be cannabis use disorder, mild, moderate, or severe. And so it's substance use is definitely, in general, tied to higher rates of suicide, unfortunately.
Do they realize how dependent they are on cannabis? Or is it
I,
something they just minimalize? Oh yeah, I smoke a joint now and then,
I've seen both. I've worked with clients who, didn't really think that they had a problem at all, and their whole life was falling apart, as a
Mhm.
result of smoking weed. And I've had other clients that said, "Oh yeah, it's a serious problem. Like basically it's 24/7, and I don't have any desire to be any, and that's so. I've seen it all, where sometimes the person will acknowledge that it's a serious problem. Whether or not they're willing to do anything about it is, kind of up in the air. But I would say more often than not, with substance use, people don't realize how large of a role it typically plays.
I think if you ask the spouse or the partner if it's a problem, I think you'll get a better answer
Yeah.
than asking the person itself because it's just too easy. I watched 2 nights ago, knowing we were going to do this show, and it was called The God Plant. I believe that's what the name of the movie was,
Uh-huh.
and it was on cannabis. Believe it or
Really?
not, I found it on Amazon Prime, so you can anyone that's got Amazon Prime go take a look. Um, I made it to about half the show, and I mean, cannabis goes way back. I mean,
Yeah.
they've been using cannabis for years. The Romans and stuff even used to use cannabis. So I think that sort of puts, well, they also used to use cocaine and stuff. So, really, I think we've learned so much over the years about cannabis and
Yeah.
its effects, but I think it's been very downplayed. I don't know if it's for monetary reasons or just to give in to the masses a little bit.
I don't know. I mean, I think that it definitely, the reality is this. Here's what I teach my clients, my students. The reality on cannabis is the truth is somewhere in the middle. You know what I mean? The truth, statistically, the truths are somewhere in the middle. And I say that because if you look at research, and keep in mind, research is always ongoing. But depending on who's doing the research, you may have specific results. And so obviously there, like for example, maybe in the federal government or government entities are doing research on the negative sides. And then there are other entities doing research, like Normal, for example, doing research on the positive aspects. The reality is, are there benefits medicinally? Sure. Are there problems? Yes. So it's somewhere in the middle. I think the big question that anyone needs to ask themselves is, why are you, what is the motivation for doing this? Are you doing this because you just, because you feel bad and you want to feel better? Or is it something that the doctor, just out of the blue said, hey, have you tried this? Like in the physician's telling you, or is it for recreation? I mean, somebody like me, and I think I'm pretty open about it. I am a textbook person with substance use disorder. I mean, if I got out the DSM-5, I would check every box. Okay. So, or would have at one point in my, let me say that, would have at one point in my life. For me to just use cannabis recreationally is just not an option. And I know that for most normal people hearing that, they think he's insane. What's wrong with him? Well, I have an issue called substance use disorder, which basically, if you think about it in a nutshell, what is substance use disorder? It's an inability to use a substance in moderation.
Right, without abusing it. Yep.
Right, without abusing it or without, having problems or without your life falling apart. And so, are there people out there that smoke a little pot and have a normal life? Absolutely. There's tons of them. But are there people out there like me that, at some point in their life, tried substances and, and those substances cause their life to absolutely crumble around them? Absolutely. And the hard part is determining, honestly, which one am I?
See, they talked about it being a gateway drug for so many years, and look at the old movies they used to scare people. Reefer Madness just came
Oh,
into
yeah.
mind while you were talking. I didn't even think about that when we were researching the show, but government tried to scare people years ago
Absolutely.
away
Yeah.
from that, and I, for my own sake, I can see how easy it is for someone to say, well, I smoked weed. It was no big deal. So yeah, I'll try a couple lines of coke,
Yeah.
or yeah, let me try that heroin or crack or meth or whatever it is. I
Yeah.
could see them going right to something like that, and I don't think that it's the drug itself that's doing it. I think it's your mindset that, hey,
Yeah.
I've done this with no problem, and they said I was going to turn into the evil old hag, and
Hmm.
look, and I'm fine, okay. So what are they talking about with cocaine? Yeah, a couple of lines and crack, a couple of lines of crack, and I'm going to be hooked on it. And that was enough for me anyway. Just hearing that we're cracked, there was just no way I'd ever go near it. That I want to talk about. We talked about youth. We talked about regular people. Now I'm going to go into my neck of the woods, the older adults.
All right.
Who there are many of them who use cannabis. I mean, just down here in Florida, I personally think that's why there's so many of these dispensaries here. It's because there's so many older people here, and
Mhm.
you know, I don't watch the doors, but if I'm stopped at a light and you watch the people coming in and out, I've seen at least 70% of the people that I've seen come in and out be someone, a senior citizen. Let's just put it at that, and
Yeah.
but we face increased risk of several health issues, including falls, heart problems, and mental health concerns. These risks can be exacerbated by potential interactions with other medications and pre-existing health conditions. Boy, like people here are on medications. Cannabis can interact with both prescription and over-the-counter medications, which increase toxicity, or decreasing effectiveness. Older adults can develop dependence on cannabis, particularly with a higher THC consumption. And we talked about that. I have a friend who starts his morning with wake and bake. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to seniors, what are the increased mental health concerns?
Well, so seniors often, like you said, use cannabis for sleep or pain, but they may not realize how it affects cognition or balance. So, obviously, if falls are a concern anyway, something that could potentially throw someone off balance probably isn't a great idea. There really is a risk for increased confusion, memory impairment, or even interactions with medications, like you mentioned. Um, so cannabis can also speed up, like if someone's dealing with cognitive decline, it could also help kind of speed that along.
This morning, we were talking before we started to record here on one of the news stations. I was reading about how some doctors come out and said that's one of the risks for Alzheimer's. To
Yeah,
increase your risk for Alzheimer's is smoking cannabis because it's something that it does to your brain, like you said, that
yeah,
diminishes. I mean, I can just see. I mean, just you go into a store, okay, go into Walmart or any of those stores and just watch all the people walk around. And it's not to make fun of them. I'm one of the people, although I think I walk pretty well. My wife says I walk slow, but I'm not in a hurry. That's why am I going to rush you? I'm not going anywhere. Um, but people have balance concerns
yeah,
already, and you know what? Or in my case, like I deal with dizziness. Okay, hence why the
yeah,
cannula is on. And I see a lot of people that deal with dizziness issues. I mean, I'm one that even if I didn't have the oxygen on, I wouldn't go up on a ladder to my roof. Just
yeah.
not going to happen anymore. Okay, I mean, I get lightheaded too easily, and you don't want to be up on the 10th step of a ladder or starting to walk across your roof and get dizzy. So why would I sit there and I probably wouldn't have smoked it now anyway. I would have taken, a gummy or something for it.
Yeah,
But, why would I put myself to that? Um, it has so much, it can affect their cognitive impairment. Okay. It affects how they think, how you deal with things in general. And, I live in a senior community where I'm one of the youngins, and though
mhm,
my wife is, but for actually someone who's over 65, I'm still one of the young people here.
yeah,
I look around, maybe there's one other person that's around my age, and everybody else is in their mid to late 70s and 80s. Those people should not be smoking weed. Okay. I mean, no matter how much you think it does you good, it doesn't do you good. It may have been fun when you were younger, but
mhm,
there's, as I said, how many people older people are not on medications. I mean,
yeah.
I'm sorry, your body's warranty runs out after a certain point, and you start taking meds for this, meds for this, meds for this, and then you need to take meds to counteract the effects of the other meds that are on your kidneys for
Yeah,
your liver.
the
And
cocktail.
yeah, it's absolutely amazing. So, I mean, people need to be careful. Um, just in general, cognitive, you know, the cognitive impairment issue of it. Um, I have a neighbor of mine who suffers from dementia a little bit, and he seems okay now on the medication, but he would look at, I know he'd walk up to his house and he would stand at the neighbor's house, staring at the house, thinking, gee, this isn't my home. He lived next door, but he would stand there looking like, wait a minute, what's wrong with this? So, that's a person I definitely would not recommend, use cannabis.
Yeah,
And, I don't think we talked about it even in the rest of the show, but this thing that you need a doctor's a medical card for
mhm,
that you have to talk to a doctor. Now, if that isn't the biggest joke I've ever seen in the world, because you don't even have to physically see a doctor anymore. You can call a doctor on the phone and say, "Oh yeah, I'm suffering from back pain.
Yep.
It's really debilitating back pain and stuff. And I know if I take this, I'm going to be okay. I can deal with the pain a lot better." You paid $115. He's giving you the card. So it's not, go to your regular doctor, your general practitioner, and ask him or her if I can get this, and you give me the note.
Yeah.
Might be very surprised the answer you get, because
Mhm.
my doctor would smack me off the top of the head. If either one of my pulmonologist or him, if I even brought up weed and stuff, because let's be real, it diminishes your reaction time, which can cause someone else to lose their
Yeah.
lives, especially if you're driving a car. I always said, you may think you're okay, and you
Yeah.
don't care if something happens to you. But what if you happen to hit that car that a mother has their twin babies in?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you
Honestly,
going to want to live with the responsibility of killing children and a mother on top of that?
I'll
That's,
never forget there was a lady named Jackie Cibarito. There used to be a website. It was Help Jackie, JACQUI, helpjackie.com, I think. But this was a girl who was hit by a drunk driver and burned severely. And I mean, that, and here's the thing, like, um, I know that when, the driver of the vehicle set out that night, it wasn't to maim somebody for life or to go to prison. It was, they were just trying to have a good time. And I understand that. But, that's the thing. These decisions can have long lasting, never ending consequences for even others.
I always say that's the designated driver. And number two, if you're friends of someone and you know that they're a little stoned and a little high, don't let them get behind the wheel of a car. Stop. Okay, it's your responsibility, because you know what? Myself personally, if he goes and maims a woman like that and stuff, you're partially responsible because you didn't stop him and
Yeah.
you had that opportunity to stop him or her from getting behind that wheel. So we need to be careful of that. Another thing I just thought of now, we didn't talk about earlier, is that with teens, especially teen girls
Mhm.
who smoke and get stoned, okay, they're leaving themselves open to be groped, molested, raped,
Mhm.
okay, because they're not in their right frame of mind. And you want them to be alert at all times. If there's some creep following them and stuff, they're not going to even realize, that creep is following them.
Yeah.
And they got to be really, really careful of that. So, is this high feeling that cannabis induces, is that disassociation?
Yeah. Yeah. It is. So it basically it's changing, our consciousness. It's changing um, our faculties that that drive the machine. So it definitely is. It can be depersonalization or um, derealization. It basically THC, it overwhelms the brain's ability to function.
You start to lose track of things. And that's why you shouldn't get behind a car. That's why you shouldn't operate machinery, because you might forget the machine is running and put your hand right there
Mhm.
just for a second. All it
Yeah.
or when we used to work, it used to be very careful of the shredding machines, because you can very easily lean down, put something in the shredder, and your tie get caught
Oh yeah.
and the shredder. And it's happened when people have choked from that. So, you need to be careful of all of that. So I want to go to, how do you deal with somebody who comes in and wants to either cut back or quit cannabis?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, we need to talk about the motivation, like what do they want to do? Because there's two ways to tackle things. There's either abstinence or there's harm reduction. So are they wanting to cut back or are they wanting to stop completely? Um, a lot of times I've had individuals that will, come seek help and they start out just wanting to cut back. I just want to cut back. And sometimes that works, but sometimes that doesn't, and then at that case, then we have to shift to, all right, so this, using is not a good situation. So how do we ensure this doesn't happen anymore? And it really is, it's a series of lifestyle changes. And, no matter which way you go, it's going to be some lifestyle changes. And as a person in recovery, I would say recovery is awesome. I have no regrets about recovery. Do I miss, drinking and drugging? Absolutely, all the time. I mean, that's the truth. I'm not going to say, oh, I don't miss it at all. I never had fun. I mean, no, of course I had tons of fun. But what I can tell you is the life that sobriety offers me is way better than any life I could have actively using something. There's just no way I wouldn't have the things that I love and value. No way.
See, I feel that way too with any kind of, whether it be weed or whatever, that, I think about it. Heck, I live in Florida where they open dispensaries almost every other week.
Yeah.
All around you. And I think to myself, where was this when I was growing up? Okay.
I know.
I mean, I had to go to the hood.
Honestly, I have a pity party every time I'm in I'm in Indiana, so we don't have dispensaries, but anytime I'm in another state, passing all these dispensaries, I have a pity party for myself too. Like, where was this stuff when I was young? It's like, well.
And it's the same thing with cigarettes. Okay. Like you say, I've stopped smoking for at least 15 years now.
Yeah.
But there's times I'm driving along in my car on the highway and someone's got their hand out the window with a cigarette. And for a flash of a second or two, I think, God, I'd love to have a cigarette right now.
Mhm.
It's just one.
Yeah.
Okay. But I also know, like, you can't have just one. Because if you have one, you're going to want a second. You're going to want to have a third. But yeah, I get it. That temptation is always going to be there. But you could actually sit down next to me and smoke a cigarette, and it will not bother me.
Yeah.
Because when I'm in my right mind, I look at it and say, okay, how did I let that little thing control my entire life?
Yeah.
I mean, to the point where I would wake up in the middle of the night to smoke a cigarette. Okay, how did I let that control me? And I'll never let it do that again.
I think part of the reason that happens is because, and actually there's I think there's a video on YouTube of it called the relapse prevention, the monster, something like that. But it's a video I did, but it talks about how does this happen? Like how in the world does somebody become addicted to heroin, or to anything? And in a nutshell, I explain it like this, it's kind of like when you first meet your best friend, like, so for anybody watching, think of your best friend, maybe it's somebody you grew up with, or maybe it's somebody you met, but think back to when you met them and when you realized, oh my gosh, this is my best friend. It's like, wow, I love hanging out with this person. I feel better when they're around. I have fun, so of course, what do? You spend more time with your best friend. That's what makes them your best friend. You're close. What happens is over time, and I always use the example of like a feral cat in a neighborhood. At my old house, I had 2 feral cats that I cared for probably a decade, probably about 10 years. They would just show up and I would feed them. So what happens when you feed a cat? They come back again. They're like, hey, I can get food over here. So they show up again. So you start feeding this friend, whatever it is. And what happens when you feed a plant? It gets bigger. And then you have to feed it more. And so eventually what happens is slowly over time, sometimes more quickly than others, but over time, it's almost like by the time the person wakes up and realizes, the state of things, I don't want to say it's too late because it's not, but like the damage is done where, it's kind of like with gambling addiction, well, how does someone determine gambling's a problem? They have financial problems. That's what gets the attention, not, oh, I'm spending more time gambling than I was before, or, it slowly creeps up, and we just have to be vigilant of that. I call it a monster because eventually a habit or an addiction of any kind will get so big we can't really come up with enough to feed it, so to speak, so it eats us. And that's being in the belly of the beast. That's active addiction.
And you always want more, whatever the
Oh
drug
yeah,
is over time. That's prevalent with cocaine, but even with weed, after a while, you know, you still want that first high that you got as it
yeah.
started to wear up. So you smoke a second one,
Mhm. Well, and
and
also sometimes, like with a certain substance, like with weed, for example, if a person's smoking weed all the time, they build a tolerance, and then it's not doing it for them.
mhm,
So then, well, this isn't working anymore. So now I got to move on to something else, which is going to work, and that could be cocaine, it could be heroin, it could be pills, it could be, any number of things. And that's kind of, how it leads to other things for some folks. The problem is if you're like me, like I said, using in moderation is just not an option.
right.
Hate to
Because
say it.
as you said, there are other things that are going to happen, and
Mhm.
masking it, you're basically just masking a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I read when doing the research for the show, they were talking about a woman who had anger issues. But well, it's now if I smoke a joint stuff, I'm calm. I don't have that anger issue and stuff. But what happens when she doesn't have
Right.
that that drug? That's what they talked about. How this woman ended up in jail. She didn't have the drug. Now the anger got 4 times
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah.
So really you're just masking a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
A big
sad.
part of recovery truly is learning, getting back in touch with my feelings. Because in active addiction, we either feel high or not high. Or I hear a lot of people say we're either high or angry and miserable. I
Right.
mean, um, what does it feel like to be worried or sad or happy? I mean, it's like we have to relearn how to feel and get back into touch with our emotions and learning how to process things again.
See, that's sad because what you said there about either going to be high or sad, then you can't deal with reality anymore.
Right.
The other way you can deal with reality is being stoned.
Yeah.
So probably Snoop Dogg's or or Willie Nelson's feelings, on that at
Yeah.
that point. Like you said, even with music, they're both music. Yeah, it was great standing up there and playing when I was stoned, but you're right. When you're sober, you
Yeah.
really feel that groove a lot better
Yeah.
and how tight
And
you are.
actually, you mentioned Willie Nelson, and I don't know, this is something I'd have to look up, but I could swear I remember reading like a year ago or a while back, more recent times, that Willie Nelson had stopped smoking weed because his doctor told him that it was bad for his
Right,
lungs. I don't
exactly. But he cut back a lot
know. Okay.
on it. But he
All
still,
right.
that's like taking coffee away from somebody, I guess. And it's interesting. So I want to wrap up with one last question for you. What advice would you give to someone who might be struggling right now to understand whether cannabis is hurting them or actually helping them?
I think that, number one, talk to your loved ones. If you are wondering if something's a problem, it's not always, but more often than not, that's a pretty good rule of thumb. So because I mean, if you are wondering if um, there are problems with your diet, for example, there probably are, and it at least warrants looking into it.
Yes, my
So
wife.
I would highly recommend, if someone is struggling, talk to your loved ones, talk to your trusted friends, people that care about you, that are going to tell you straight. And then also, don't hesitate to reach out for some help. Therapists, I mean, I offer a free consultation. Most therapists are going to offer a free consultation. They'll at least talk to you for a moment to see what's going on and to see if they can help. And I always say if it's, you know, it, worst case scenario, spend the amount for one appointment and go talk to somebody and just see, because for the cost of one appointment, then you can determine accurately if it truly is a problem or not.
And there's probably some online things where you can talk
Yeah,
to
there
a
are different.
counselor just for at least, and they might tell you, yes, you need to go see someone and talk to them, get
Yeah.
that free thing. Because I think a lot of people too are afraid. We constantly talk about the stigma behind it.
Yeah.
People still have that stigma about seeking professional help. I was there once. I know what it's all about, and I just didn't care.
Yeah.
I just still this way to this very day. You don't like something, you don't like something. Not my problem, that's yours.
Yeah.
So, go out and seek help. I mean, like you said, we both know. It was so good. We're not trying to say don't smoke weed, okay, and don't smoke. That's not what the show is about. Okay, the show is about cannabis. Okay, is
Yeah.
it good for you? Is it not? What are some of the possible side effects, so to speak, of doing cannabis, of smoking
Yeah.
cannabis? And it can forget about the physical side, because we're not doctors. I can only read you things, but the mental health side we can talk about,
Mhm.
because that's what this show is all about.
Yep.
So as we close today's episode, I want to leave you with this. Cannabis may help some people medically in some ways, but for many others, it could be silently stealing their peace, their clarity, and even their future. So, as you should know by now, we're not here to preach. We're here to protect. Because when it comes to your mental health, your emotional well being, and your life, every choice you make matters. Every conversation like this one at least helps to break that silence that we have. So, if you or someone you care about is struggling with anxiety, depression, panic, or confusion, and cannabis is part of the picture, please reach out for help. Talk to someone. If it's your friend, have them talk to somebody. Remember, you're not alone. As the show is showing today, and every one of our shows, you're not alone. There are
Yeah.
many others who are silently suffering for no reason, because there's help and there's healing. So tonight's been such an insightful conversation. And as always, a huge thank you, Dr. Davis, for your insight and sharing your invaluable wisdom with us. And of course, if this episode resonated with you, or you got thinking about someone you know might have a problem, is unaware of the risks, or maybe just as a parent that's dealing with a teen who is using cannabis, please remember you can always share this episode with them, because you might be saving a life. And don't forget, if you like what you watched tonight, hit that subscribe button, that like button, select to be notified of each issue, so you'll never miss an exciting new episode and topic. It only takes a moment, and it truly helps the channel. And we already gave you a preview, because next week will be on schizophrenia. Okay, it's actually interesting because we try to remain continuous. We'll mention a subject during the show and then follow that off onto the next episode. So there is some continuity. And remember, you can visit our website at yourlifematterspodcast.com for more information about our show and ways to connect to us if needed. Remember, you'll find links for Dr. Davis's practice, for the website and stuff that's on there. We thank you for all the people that are joining lately, subscribing. I know at recording time, we're up to close to 3,500 people.
Let's make it 4,000.
Yeah,
Come on.
no,
Come
I
on,
won't go
guys.
for 5. Heck with 4. Let's just go for 5, so I don't have to say it each week. Okay. So we hope you both will join us next week for the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Not a contest, it's a podcast, where we'll continue exploring the stories and strategies that help us live life with more purpose, more clarity, more compassion. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and take care of each other. So God bless you all. Please take care of your heart, mind, and body. And never forget, your life matters. We're here for you. See you then.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this week's new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week for another great episode with your host Steve Hodgson and psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis. Please remember to subscribe to our channel if you have not already done so, and hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode. Your help with this helps us reach a wider audience that may need our help. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you are valuable and important. Take time to cherish yourself and those around you. Never forget, your life matters.